in this video, I will help you to prepare for our first exam for the Principle of Macroeconomic class. So what you're seeing in this screen is actually our week 5 exam 1 module. And so when you start this week, you will see it will look a little different from the previous week because you don't see anything like a checklist, assignments, or lecture, because the one job for this week is taking the exams. So before you start to take the exams, I highly encourage you to read through all the material attached on this module and also do some practice and review before you take our exams. So the first file you see in this module is our checklist. So you will see we only have one on the list, so which is our first exams. So our first exam will be on Connect. And the second file you will see here is give you some general idea about how this exam look like. So one thing I want to emphasize is that for our first exam, and similar as our second exam and also final exams, so it will only have 60 multiple choice. However, you only have 1 hour to finish all of them. So which means, although it's an open book, open note, I don't think you have enough time to check your note and books. It will be a good idea you prepare well before you start to take the exams. So you can take this exam between September 24th, 8 a.m. to September 30th, 11 p.m. So you have the whole week to work on the exams. But one thing you have to keep in mind, so once you start, you have to finish within 1 hour, and which means if your internet is not working well, you'd better not start this exam. So make sure you have a good internet connection and a good quality computer before you decide to start the exams. Again, so this exam will be timing will be timed. So 1 hour you have to finish 60 multiple choice. So it will cover from chapter 1 to chapter 4. Basically, is what we already learned from chapter 1 to chapter 4. And so this file will give you some idea how the exam will look like. And on the bottom, you will see the screenshot is where you can find your homework assignment. So basically is where you'll find your homework. Before you find homework on the week 4, but now you're in week 5. If you log in the Connect, you will see on the week 5, you only have one assignment called exam 1. And also, if you clicked it, you will see it highlighting that you have to finish within 60 minutes. So this assignment will be really different from your previous homework because previous homework you can start anytime and you just need to finish before 11 p.m. on Sunday. However, for this one, once you start, you have to finish within an hour. And again, 60 multiple choice. And so the main purpose for this video actually is help you to go through our review sheet. And so when you look at our review sheet, and so I hope at this point you can pause the video because I do hope you can print this handout out and write down anything I mentioned in this video because they're very important and you should be able to see some questions related to those knowledge points. And besides what I emphasize, you also still need to review all the slides. And also I did have the uploaded the practice question on the Connect. So once you log in the Connect, you should be able to see here because I record a video before our day starts. So if you look at this homework, it's locked currently, but once you get to September 23, 11 p.m., you should be able to access to this file. So this is called the practice question number 1, chapter 1 to 4. So there's about a couple of questions, so you can look at it to help you to prepare for your our first exams. So let's go back to our files here. So for this file, I will just help you to go through all the concept, and I'll emphasize certain concept, which means it's very important. So in chapter 1, we're learning the basic definition related economics. So first of all, you have to know what are the 3 core issues: what, how, and for whom. Not only know what, how, for whom, but also what does that mean. So what is what means, and what is how mean, and what is for whom mean. And so especially you have to know what's the definition for scarcity, and also the definition for economics. And when we are learning the scarcity and we start to define the definition to define the economics. So economics is not just about money. Keep in mind, it is about how to best allocate the scarce resource. So that's why you have to know what is the definition for scarcity, and also what's the definition for economics. And so when we talk about the scarcity, we mentioned about 4 factors. So this is a very basic requirement. So you have to know what are the 4 factors. Please check your notes and book. I will not tell you the answer here. Look at the notes, slides, and the book. So what are the 4 factors for the production? And then after we learn the scarcity, and we know every resource has a limited supplies. So for the scarce resource, if you are using for making product A, that means you cannot use the same resource to make product B. So that means we have trade-off. So that generates another concept is called opportunity cost. So for the opportunity cost, it's very, very important to understand what's the definition for opportunity cost. And also, if you look at chapter 1 homework, so there's a couple questions ask you to calculate the opportunity cost. So you have to know how to figure out the opportunity cost. And the next one is called the production possibility curve. And we mentioned for the production possibility curve, so what kind of information can be found from the production possibility curve? So first, we can find the trade-off between resource. Second, we can find opportunity cost. And so third, we can find the scarcity. And the next is what's the location on the production possibility curve means. So we learn any dot on the curve, that means we are using the resource efficiently. And any production happen inside the production possibility curve, that indicating you are inefficiently to do the production. So if the production happen outside the production possibility curve, so that's considered as unachievable production combination. So keep in mind how to read the production possibility curve and what kind of information you can find from this curve. And next is increasing opportunity cost. So try to understand what do we mean by increasing opportunity cost and how does this happen. And the next for the economic growth, and the only thing you need to know is how you should use a PPC to represent economic growth. So basically, if we have economic growth, you will see production possibility curve shift outward. So shift outward. And then we will look at the mechanism. So different kind of mechanism. And the market mechanism, we have market mechanism and a government controlled mechanism. So what are the differences? And here I also want to emphasize one more knowledge, which is not on these slides. So you also have to review what are the differences between macroeconomics, which is MAC, which is what we're learning in this class. So what's the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics, MIC? So what are the differences between these 2 different kind of economics? So definitely we'll see the multiple choice related to this pair of concept. What are the differences between microeconomics and macroeconomics? So this is pretty much about chapter 1. So we have 15 questions from chapter 1. So now we move on to chapter 2. So for chapter 2, we also have 15 multiple choice from chapter 2. So chapter 2 we basically learn the U.S. economy. So keep in mind, again, you have to know how the U.S. answered the 3 core questions: what, how, and for whom. So to answer what to produce, and we learn 2 different concepts. GDP, so you need to know the definition for GDP. So in the class, I emphasize the definition for GDP is that, first of all, it's the final goods. So you need to know what is the final goods. And the second, we mentioned that it's in a certain period of time. So it's not measured 10 years, 20 years. So they are usually 1 year. So you have to know what does that mean, a certain period of time. And so also you need to know how to calculate the GDP per capita. And we mentioned for GDP per capita, it actually measures the quality of life. So the quality of life is not measured by GDP. Actually, it's measured by the GDP per capita, or the life standard is measured by the GDP per capita. And also you have to know if we have seen GDP per capita increasing, it can be because the population growth rate is slower than GDP's growth rate, or GDP's growth rate is faster than the population's growth rate. So that all will cause the GDP per capita growth. So you have to know what will result in the GDP per capita growth. So this is how the US answer what to produce. So in terms how to produce, and we talk about the capital intensive, labor intensive. So you have to know what is the definition for capital intensive and labor intensive, and also what's the function for labor mobility in one economy. How will that help the economic growth? And then we will look at you need to know what's the right role for government. Should they run the economy, or if not, so what kind of role they should play so that they will not destroy economy. And also you have to have some common sense about the US, how the change of the mix of output, basically looking at in 3 different industry: agriculture, manufacturing, and service, the 3 industry. So during the past 100 years, how these 3 industry changed. So we learned in the class that agriculture industry is decreasing. The proportion of the agriculture in US economy is decreasing, and also the proportion of the manufacturing industry in US also decreasing. So the only industry is increasing is service industry. As we mentioned that it is a really good sign. So usually the developed country has a relatively large portion of service industry. So that's the characteristic of the US economy and how the US answer how to produce. And the last question is for whom to produce. To answer this question, we usually discuss how the income are distributed. And so here I want to mention that compared with the developing country, US is doing much better. So what we found is the poorer the country, the larger the income gap will have, such as Malaysia, India. So if you go to look at those countries, their income gap is very huge. So those concepts has to keep in mind. And so in order to close the gap, and the government have all kind of policies. So one policy is they are using a tax, try to close the gap. So you have to know different kind of taxations. So this is chapter 2, the US economy. And so we have 15 questions from chapter 2. Also, we have 15 questions. It's coming from chapter 3, supply and the demand. So first of all, for the flow chart, circular flow chart, so the main thing you have to keep in mind is what are the 2 markets and what are 4 participants. And so for the 4 participants, what are their goals? So such as producer, try to maximize the profit. How about consumer? And how about international participants? And also how about the government? So what are their goals? You have to know. And also you need to know what's the definition for markets. As I said, a market, it doesn't has to be like Walmart or something. So if any places have a transaction happening, we call it market. Even it can be invisible market, like a stock market. We mentioned you don't see people directly having transaction facing to face. So every transaction happening in the internet, it is still considered as market because there is transaction happening. And so then we're going to look at the demand. So keep in mind what's the definition for demand. Especially I emphasize the demand has to be willingness and able to buy. So it's cannot just willing, but they cannot afford it, or they can afford it but they don't want to buy. So it has to be they want to buy and also they can buy. So that's will contribute the definition of demand. So keep in mind, look at the definition again. So then we will look at the law of the demand. So as price goes up, the demand goes down. Ceteris paribus. So for the ceteris paribus, you have to know the definition for ceteris paribus besides the law of the demand. So we mentioned the ceteris paribus means the other keep as constant. The reason we impose these assumptions is try to help us to analyzing the relationship between price and the quantity demanded easier. And then we will look at the demand determinant. So any of the determinant change actually will cause the shift of the curve, either shift to the left, shift to the right. So you not only need to know how they change, taste, income, other good expectation, number of the buyer, how they will shift the demand curve. But most importantly, if I give you an example, you have to know which direction the demand will shift, demand curve will shift. So generally speaking, when you read the case, the number one thing you need to think about is, does that affect the consumer taste or affect consumer income, or it is related to other goods? So after you define that, then you think about whether they increase the demand or decrease the demand. If you think it's increased demand, always shift to the right. If you think it's a decrease the demand, always shift to the left. So you have to know when and how to shift the curve based on the detailed specific case. So you're definitely going to see the multiple choice. I give you a case and you will make decision which direction the demand will shift or whether demand increase or decrease. And so number 7, you have to know what's the difference between shift and movements along the demand curve. Shifting the demand curve means one of your determinant changed. But if you talk about move along the curve, that only means the product price changed. So then you will move along the curve. And then you will look at the market demand. So what's the difference between market demand and the individual demand we just learned? And number 9, the determinant of supply. And very similar as the determinant of the demand. And so you have to keep in mind what are those factors. If I give you a specific case, you have to be able to identify whether the supply shift to the right or shift to the left. Again, generally speaking, after you read the case, you need to know which which determinant is affected. So by affecting that determinant, supply increase or decrease. If the supply increase, so that indicating your curve should shift to the right. If that's decreasing your supply, and your supply curve supposed to shift to the left. And also for law of the supply, and you have to know when the price goes up and the supply will goes up as well, and the ceteris paribus. And it's very important you know the ceteris paribus and how the law of the supply looks like. And then the next 13, equilibrium, is very important. You need to know when to find equilibrium. You know, as we said, it's the intersection between supply and demand curve. So that will give you equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity selling on the market. And so for the equilibrium is when the supply equal to the demand. And then we look at the price floor and the price ceiling. So keep in mind, so for the price floor, so here there's a typo. So for the price floor, actually it is above the equilibrium point, and if we have the price floor, and we usually will end up surplus, so which means the minimum price the buyer has to pay, so which usually is higher than the equilibrium price, and price ceiling usually below the equilibrium point, and it will creating the shortage. And so you have to understand price floor and price ceiling. You're definitely going to see multiple choice related to floor and ceiling. And chapter 4, and we have 15 questions from chapter 4 as well. So this is our last of 15 questions. And so for the market failure, you have to keep in mind public goods, market power, externality, and inequality. They all create a market failure. So especially for public goods, and you need to know what's the definition for public goods, and also what's the definition for private goods. Since they are totally opposite goods, you need to know what's the definition for private goods as well. So we mentioned that for the public goods, it created problems because the free rider dilemma. So this is such a famous theory that you're definitely going to see the question related to this theory. What is the free rider dilemma? So what's the definition for free rider dilemma? And so then you need to look at the externality. And what's the definition for externality? We had a recent discussion, week 3 discussion related to externality. So make sure you understand what's the definition for externality. And so when we talk about externality, we have positive externality and a negative externality. So you have to know when we have a positive externality, if we let the market run, what's going to happen? So positive externalities such as education, which is discussed. So usually the market will underproduce. So the government has to step in to help to purchase the product so that we will have enough supply. If we have the negative externality, like people smoke and they generate the poison air to people surrounding them, So to avoid this negative impact on third party, and the government step in, they put high tax on the cigarette so that it will frustrate the production and then try to reduce the supply of the product that has negative externality. So you have to know this kind of relationship. And then you need to know market power. What's the definition for market power? So generally speaking, in the U.S., the monopoly is illegal. So the law to regulating the monopoly is called the antitrust law. So the antitrust law is trying to control the company's market power. And then the last one is about taxation. So this is very, very important. And the one thing you have to keep in mind is in the United States, the majority, the government, the revenue is coming from income tax. So the income tax is the main source for the government to get the revenue. So income tax, and also for income tax, no matter you do the math calculation or not, you have to bear in your mind income tax in US is the progressive tax, which means the more income you have, the higher tax rate you need to pay. So you can Google it. If you look at our tax bracket, you will find the people who are earning more income every year, they actually ending up in paying higher tax rate. So keep in mind, it's a tax rate, it's not tax. So the higher income people pay higher tax rate. And also for the regressive tax, and you need to know what are the examples of what kind of tax are belonging to regressive tax, which means the higher income and the lower tax rates you are facing. So such as social security tax, local and the state tax. So they are all regressive tax. So this is pretty much about chapter 4. So I will correct the arrow for the price floor and price ceiling. So when you download the handout, you should see the difference from my video and what you've seen. So please follow the PDF you are seeing now, because the price floor is above equilibrium price and price ceiling is below the equilibrium price. So I will do that change so you will get the updated handout. So this is pretty much all about our first exams. And again, and good luck and prepare well. And most importantly, you don't want your internet and your computer screw you up. So make sure find a place have good internet connection, and also using a good computer so it will not shut down in the middle of your exam, because once you shut down, you cannot go back to work it again. So you only have 1 hour. So good luck. If you have any question, feel free to email me.